Well, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this month's Cyber Showcase, a conversation about M365 security. As always, I'm your host, Bret Rock, a business development and product specialist here at SBS. Really appreciate you taking some time for us again today. And on the other line here, I've got our resident expert on M365, Frank Hulscher. Frank's a senior IT auditor on our team, been here quite a while and does great work on the M365 stuff. There's nobody that would be better to be here with us today to talk about this. So Frank, I'm going to let you introduce yourself real quick.
Yeah, thanks, Brett. Happy to be here. As he alluded to, I've been here with SBS for 10 years and been getting my feet wet, or lack of a better word there, in the 365 Azure space here the last 3-4 years. So got a lot of good stuff for you guys today.
Yeah, very excited about it. And like I said, I couldn't have picked somebody better to be here. So we appreciate it. All right. So just quickly, first of all, there's some flattering photos of the two of us, as well as our contact information. I say this every time, but I don't think I'm speaking out of turn. If you need to reach out to either of us, whether it's me or Frank for additional information or questions or anything else, I just noticed I didn't type in Frank's entire phone number there. So I'll try to fix that on the slide deck if anybody wants it. But feel free to reach out to us. We're happy to answer questions as always. A couple of things before I do get into the agenda. We do have a quick survey at the end of this. If you don't mind taking that, it's always helpful for us planning forward and making sure that we get you anything you might need. There's a question on that survey about requesting the slide deck and or the recording of today's webinar. So if you do want a copy of that, you can answer that survey question. Alternatively, feel free to shoot me an email and we can send that to you afterward as well. So I just wanted to get that housekeeping out of the way. Last thing there, though, if you do have questions, go ahead and use the question box that's been provided by Zoom. We'll try to get those answered at the end of today's webinar. If we don't have time, we certainly will follow up with you directly. So with that said, just quickly, the agenda. We're going to talk briefly about some introductions and agenda. We're going through that. We'll talk about what's coming from SBS, a couple of webinars we got coming up. I just want to mention, we're going to jump right into things by talking about the benefits of M365, the negatives of M365, and then we're going to get into really what you came here today for, kind of the do's and don'ts. So we're going to go through some of the things that we would recommend you certainly do, some of the things we would encourage you not to do. Frank will highlight all those different areas and get into some really fun areas of discussion, I think. We'll talk a little bit about the M365 Hardening Assessment that SBS does perform. You're going to hear us talk about that kind of throughout today's conversation. But we are going to save some time at the end to really have Frank walk us through what that looks like. It's a great service, really, I think, pretty original in terms of how it operates. So we'll talk about that. We'll get into some takeaways, and then if time permits, we will have some Q&A. So that is the plan for today. Just quickly, as a reminder for anybody who doesn't know us, or if you are familiar with us, hopefully this is a good refresher. SBS Cybersecurity, we've been in the industry for 20 years. We love working with our partners or our customers. If you haven't worked with us in the past, we'd love to have the opportunity to earn your business going forward. We've got all kinds of credentials. You probably know all about us more than even I do. So if there's anything we can help out, any gaps we can fill in terms of your knowledge of SBS, please do let us know. I mentioned a second ago that I just wanted to really quickly highlight some of really exciting SBS Institute webinars we've got coming up. Later this month, we do have on the 12th, we've got Christy Thomas, who leads our audit team. She's going to be doing top audit recommendations for 2025. We conduct about 500 audits per year across the United States. Frank's a part of that team currently, so he does some of that work as well. She's going to share the 10 most frequently recommended IT audit findings over the past year, and then start talking about how your organization or institution can leverage some of those to get ahead of next or this year's audit potentially. So that one's coming up February 12th. And then in March, Dylan Smith on our team on the network security side of things is going to talk about how and what to test for 2025 when it comes to network security. He's going to talk about the security testing trends that we've seen in the industry, what technology you should be thinking about, additional tech testing considerations. I think it's going to be a great opportunity for you to learn more about some of the testing you might want to consider for 2025. So definitely take a look at those. And again, if you get the slide deck, those will be linked to directly if you're interested. All right. So with that said, let's jump into kind of the meat and potatoes of today's conversation, M365 security. Now, obviously, M365 is an extremely popular platform. There are others out there that we can certainly work with as well. We're going to focus primarily on M365 today. But the real interesting thing to me about M365 is the idea that it's really built for collaboration. It's built for providing these tools that allow us to share information and talk to one another and collaborate and all those sorts of things. But obviously that opens up a wealth of opportunity for bad guys as well. So while it's not necessarily, and we'll talk more about this, and again, Frank's our expert here, while it's not something that's stamped out in regulation, hey, have you had your M365 environment reviewed by a third party, or you do any internal reviews? It certainly is something that you should be considering, because there are a lot of potential pitfalls when it comes to M365, even though there are some great security features that they do include. So just quickly on the benefit side, anybody who's already moved to the platform, I'm sure you're familiar with all of these, but it does enhance collaboration and productivity, whether it's Teams or SharePoint or OneDrive. All of those are built to increase our communication and collaboration and sharing of information. It does provide cost efficiency and scalability. It has integrated security features that we're going to hit on as we're moving along today. One of the big things, and I know Frank's a big proponent of this, so I'm going to let him talk about it in a moment as well, but they do have all that great innovation and the continuous development, whether it's those regular feature updates or talking about AI. Everybody's talking about AI, but obviously Microsoft does that quite a bit as well, data analytics and all those sorts of things. And then it does help with compliance and governance as well. Frank, I know as we were kind of preparing for today's webinar, you mentioned that the innovation part of that is something that you're particularly interested in when it comes to M365. So I'm going to turn it over to you to talk a little bit about why that's so important.
Yeah. And, with the clients that we work with, there's still a fear of moving into the cloud universe or environment, if you will. And rightfully so, with a new platform such as 365, the controls might be a little different. The risks and threats look a little different, but with the innovation and the continuous development that the vendor here, Microsoft, we get the modern day controls. We'll go into specific features and stuff like that, but this is what they're focusing on. If you follow Microsoft at all, they have this huge secure future initiative going on, which we've seen some really good things that it pertains to the 365 environment, where, your global admins or your administrators and all users now are required to do MFA or set up MFA at least there. So this is where they're focusing. This is where, some folks will say the future is going to cloud. And just because it's, a little scary environment, if you will, there are ways to mitigate the risk as well. And they're the modern day controls. So always, and with the boom of AI, Brett, all these tools have some form of AI in them. If it's from risk detections or, getting to know how your users are signing in. Anything we can, get ahead of the bad guys.
Yeah. Yeah. And I just think, there's a ton of benefits. We don't want to scare anybody. We don't want to come across as being, saying you shouldn't be moving to the cloud or use M365. I think that, we use it internally. We do a lot of sharing on Teams. We do a lot of, communicating back and forth in that way, and SharePoint and OneDrive and all those other features and functionalities and tools that M365 does provide us are great. So we want to make sure that if you choose to avail yourself of those, that you're getting the value out of them. But we also just want to make sure that we're being secure, we're doing the right things, and it's pretty easy. And I think Frank will highlight a lot of this as we're moving through it. It's pretty easy to overlook some of the areas that can cause some risk here. So lots of great benefits, but also some negatives as well. Obviously, increased sharing and increased collaboration that naturally leads to greater cyber risk. The open nature of M365, that's going to lead to be a prime target for phishing and ransomware attacks. Kind of the big one here, misconfigurations are just really common and easy to overlook. I'm going to ask Frank, I forget where, somewhere down along the road here, we're going to talk a little bit about, with our assessment, how many findings do we typically come up with the first time we look at it? And I think it'll be surprising for a lot of people. So even the best people at setting up M365 can, accidentally overlook something or, just forget to take a look at it. So those misconfigurations are really common, unfortunately. Obviously, you got a greater dependency on the cloud infrastructure. It's a vendor like any other. So, your information's out there more. You are reliant on them for not just security, but making sure it's running right and you don't have any downtime and things like that. There's a lot of concern over third-party integration with different applications. Frank's got some recommendations around that as well. Having those third-party applications can be really beneficial, but they do come with additional risk as well. And then just kind of the overall complexity of managing a hybrid environment, if that's the situation you find yourself in. So, Frank, before we start to get into the do's and don'ts here, is there anything, and I know we're going to get into a lot of detail here, but is there anything that stands out as particularly concerning when it comes to M365, just kind of more broadly?
Yeah, and there's a saying that we always say is when it comes to the 365 platform here is licensing is half the battle. So maybe falls into the misconfiguration or under license for the security features that we need if we want to control access a specific way or how folks are sharing or collaborating through SharePoint and OneDrive and back to the compliance on the other side, really understanding the logging, retention and things of that nature. So really taking a good look, and I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves about what we do with our service, but licensing is important when we're looking at the environment and ensuring that you are licensed appropriately to protect the data if we are using SharePoint OneDrive for, say, our main storage areas, cloud storage there. So yeah, licensing is one of those negatives there, in my opinion, because it can be confusing and sometimes vendors just make that decision for us and we really don't understand which features are part of which license and things of that nature. So can create some gaps there in our
I think
security.
in our conversations previously, you've even kind of brought up instances where people they didn't even know they had access to certain
Right.
applications. And obviously that can be concerning because, what's out there. And if we don't know exactly where we're sharing our data, or I think you mentioned that if you share it in Teams, it can show up in other spots and things like that as well, right?
Right. Yeah, and even if with the boom of AI, right? You might share a sensitive document with someone and the default sharing permission is anyone in the org, right? So now anyone can potentially use Copilot or search for that file if it's in SharePoint there as at the org level and potentially have access to it that shouldn't have access to it. So yeah, there's some little twerks there, I'll call them, to ensure like, hey, this is how this works, and this is what we can do to ensure, folks have in this example, the approved folks have access to that data instead of everyone if it gets shared.
Yeah. So in terms of obviously managing hybrid environments isn't a brand new thing. It's not a new concept by any stretch, but do you think any elements of M365 in particular have complicated kind of how we manage those environments?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Brett, here. And I think some of the frustration that comes in is, user experience and identity management specifically, and ensuring that, we're syncing the right accounts and the right directories over, and even devices, right? And I see a lot that devices don't get synced over, which we'll talk a little bit in the do's. But also to that is password management for our users. So the user experience, Microsoft is in hybrid environments, you have an opportunity or the feature to have password write back. And what that means is, in hybrid environments, I should back up a little bit, your on-prem, if you will, password policy is, hey, that's when we're going to expire the passwords. We're going to change them every 90 days. If you don't have that password right back in place and a user changes their password in the Microsoft world, if you will, they could potentially kind of lock themselves out of the network. So it's really just again one of those twerks where we look at and make sure like, hey, let's make sure that the passwords don't expire on a different timer within the 365 space and really let our on-prem controls and policies there really dictate some of that stuff. So,
yeah. So last question here, I guess, before we jump into some of the things we do and don't recommend here. third-party applications is on here, and I think there are a lot of really good ones out there, and probably will continue to see that grow in the future. Do you see a lot as we're going kind of reviewing people's environments? Do you see a lot of third-party integrations in the
Mhm.
maybe in the financial services space, since that's kind of who we serve the most at this point? Do you
Mhm.
see a lot of those sort of third-party integrations, or is that something that we're maybe in the future would be more prominent?
Yeah, absolutely seen it right now. And, by default here, third-party applications, any user can provision or accept or install, however you want to word that, any third-party app that's from the Office store, from within Microsoft Teams. Oh, by the way, there's over 30,000 apps in Microsoft Teams. And by default, there's really no limitations or controls on what users can install and start potentially using sensitive information or creating sensitive information or sharing or storing in those third-party applications. So it's definitely something that we always look for and talk about and ensure that the appropriate controls are in place to ensure that admins are involved. We know how, shadow IT, for example, right, is a threat here to, hey, I didn't know folks were using X app, right? And that app had, sensitive information in it, and they just had a huge vulnerability or something like that. Um, you know, one little example, we saw that Snapchat was being used in Teams when I was reviewing these settings with a client. So interesting things that you find there. So very important to highlight those third party apps and
How to manage them? Yeah.
controls around there.
Absolutely. All right. Well, again, don't mean to scare people, but certainly want you to be cautious and make sure you're buttoned up as much as you can be. So we'll talk about some ways to do that, certainly. All right. So moving into the do's and don'ts section. So the first one, this is kind of an easy one, kind of a layup to some degree, but do make sure that you are utilizing the security measures that are included with M365. So we talked about this a little bit earlier. M365 does have a lot of great security features that are available, and we want to make sure you're availing yourself of those. Frank, why don't you talk a little bit about, if you don't mind, if you will, about the built-in security frameworks that they have, and maybe some of the things that you recommend when it comes to those built-in security features that they've already got.
Yeah. And I think here what we're alluding to is the Microsoft Secured Score
Mm-hmm.
area of the tenant here. And this is a great place to look at controls, plan, strategize. Even they recently just got an update where now it provides you licensing information because unfortunately, this secured score portal, if you will, provides, not only specific frameworks like CIS, HIPAA, GDPR, and stuff, but Microsoft recommendations as well. And it's not pertained to your current license. So, for example, if you're like Business Basic and they're telling you, hey, here's a recommendation to implement identity protection or sign in risk policies. Well, I'm not licensed for that. Now they've updated to kind of point you in the direction and tell you like, hey, you're either licensed or not licensed for this, which was super helpful for folks, I feel like, because you could kind of, again, it goes back to the license. I'm not sure what these features mean and what protections they provide, and even if I'm currently licensed for it. So definitely something that is so helpful, if you're first time in the environment, not sure where to start um, type features here. It's going to give you a list from, protecting email to your identity to logging to compliance, even recommendations. I think they call them improvement actions, actually, um, in all areas and all aspects. So really good tool there at your fingertips.
Yeah. So what about like any of the actual, so obviously there are some security features available in their different applications. Are there any that stand out that you feel are particularly strong, or making, you want to make sure people are absolutely taking advantage of?
Yeah, so by, no matter what your license is, if you have a business or E3 or E5 enterprise or business license, you get what Microsoft calls built-in protection policies around email. And this was a really, really good improvement by them, where now anyone with a business or enterprise license gets that safe attachment, safe link protection there when it comes with inbound email and stuff like that. So obviously don't, turn those off or anything like that. Like obviously you can build your own and customize your own policies if it's a specific group of folks, a department, leadership, whatever it may be. But those built-in ones from an email perspective are really nice to see, and
Yeah.
those are pretty recent in the last year or two.
So I'm not an expert on M365. I will, if I haven't already made that clear, I'm sure I will as we're moving along here today. But I hear a lot about security score. Is that like a? Can you kind of explain what that means and how important it is to be considered at all?
Right. Right. So that kind of alluded that to that
Mhm.
during the Microsoft Secured Score portal description there. So all of these recommendations have, kind of an impact score, and higher your percentage, the more secure you are. And again, there will be some things or some recommendations in that list that you might be limited to by license there, but you can address that. And again, you can use this score as maybe a goal or the list of improvement actions as a strategic plan there. And it's also good to show progress as we work through those things, and, good reports and good good ways to show leadership, the improvement and the status of the environment as well. And these things are on an hour sync update. So according to their documentation, Microsoft's documentation. So if we turn something on or turn something off or reconfigure something, it'll help keep track of that stuff for you in real time.
Do you find that score to be, as you go through, and we'll talk more about kind of the manual efforts that you put into reviewing these things. Do you find that score to be fairly accurate?
Yeah. Yep. The way I look at that score might be something I look on day one just to kind of get an idea what I'm walking into. Obviously, if it's a low score, I know what their licensing are, so I'm keeping that in perspective as
Mhm.
well. Because I don't see a lot of folks really utilizing this to get an accurate number, but after my assessment, understanding what they have in place and what that number is, it makes sense.
Mhm.
It's only going to go up after having, a third party review there. But yeah, from an accuracy standpoint, you got to keep in mind there's going to be things or recommend actions there that are going to be counting against you. And again, I'm not licensed for. So really addressing those, and maybe you have other security solutions in place, right? Mimecast or a proof point or some other identity access management or PAM, some other solution that's giving you that control. You can make those notes on those improvement actions and give yourself credit. So it's a little manual work, but if anything, it gives you a great starting point and a good place to, strategically plan for your teams, for yourselves, to secure the environment even more.
Great. So that's our first do. Let's get to our first don't.
Mm.
Don't assume that because you hired a third party to set up your environment that it's perfect and ready to go. So uh, obviously, we love MSPs. We partner with a lot of them. We think they do great work.
Mhm.
But this is a complex situation, and sometimes misconfigurations happen, things like that. So I think if you are outsourcing that and you get kind of in a situation where let me rephrase that. So let's say I do have a third party set it up for me, Frank, and
Mhm.
then you come in and you do your assessment. Um, you know, Pretty common to still find some misconfigurations and things like that, right?
100%. And I think, half the time that's why we're coming in is the customer's not sure what the MSP has done or should be doing type stuff, and we collaborate with them as well. We include them in our meetings and stuff like that to, if anything, it's a knowledge base, um for them, so to say. So I guess I kind of forgot what your question is.
No,
uh
just saying like, well, here's a good way to ask it. So in an assessment of a completely out of the box, they just configured this about how, how likely are we to have findings, and then how many? I know that you've had some
Yeah.
numbers in the past that were pretty
Yeah.
startling.
So on a first time review, probably going to have upwards between 20 to 25 there, depending on your license. And with an MSP, I don't see a huge difference. Maybe we do have some MFA enabled. Maybe we do have some cloud only accounts, things like that. But really looking at each, and I don't want to get ahead of ourselves, looking at each admin center and going into each specific setting. MSPs, I can't think of one that's doing it that in depth. It's more of, hey, let's get this going, collaborating using Teams for meetings and getting email going there and really, a couple years we're on it and client reaches out to us to look at it and the MSP goes, "Oh yeah, we can do that. We just haven't done it for you." Um, so to say. So I guess it doesn't matter if an MSP is involved. It's first time review is going to be between 20 and 25 recommendations. And keep in mind that the beauty of the 365, half of those are things that we can toggle on and off. It's really black and white. So it's not going to take a whole lot of time to remediate um, majority of these recommendations.
Yeah, I think you've pointed that out before in some of the conversations you've had internally, where it's some of these things are just easy. I just flick a switch, and theoretically, and that finding has been fixed. So a lot of these misconfigurations are pretty easy to remediate, as you pointed out.
Mhm.
So you touched on something that I think is important in cybersecurity. At our company, we see a lot of that push and pull between security and usability, right, and convenience. Is that kind of some of the issues that you see around some of these misconfigurations? Sometimes it's we
Yeah.
want to be as convenient as we can, so we're kind of sacrificing some of the security at times.
Right. And two things come to mind, and we'll go back to the MSP. Usually they have an account that has high privilege, your global admin, it's the highest privilege role within the environment. They're the only ones with that leverage level of privilege, as well as they just sign in. They're bypassing the MFA requirement or excluded from that, if you're familiar with the language there. So they don't perform MFA. And to that point, for users saying coming from the organization's network, they'll exclude that network from the MFA requirement as well. And we talk about that and kind of the risks there, right? We're basically saying that our vendor will never be compromised and our network is 100% secure. And we know that's not, w- we know that that can potentially happen and stuff. So we talk about implementing those controls and, really understanding the vendor's access um, method there and how they're getting access to your tenant and making sure that you have a high privileged account there in case, heaven forbid they are having an incident or an issue, you can disable that account and things of that nature. And
Mhm.
when it comes to on-prem or trusted location authentication requirements, we can put in specific time frames there to prompt them maybe once a week, so to say, and things of that nature, just to ensure, hey, you are who you say you are when you're logging in.
I mean, in a lot of ways, this is not. I mean, it is vendor management, right? I mean, it is if there
Mhm.
is, if there are any repercussions, it's still our information. It's still our job to protect that. So, yeah, even if we do have somebody else set it up, we're still responsible for any failings or misconfigurations or anything that might occur from those, right?
100%. Yep.
All right. So don't assume just because you had somebody else set it up that it's good to go.
Mhm.
Do consider common M365 setup vulnerabilities. So Frank, this is where I'm just going to let you cook. You're the expert here. We've already talked about some of the common vulnerabilities that arise during setup specifically. What other ones do we need to think about that maybe we haven't thought about or talked about previously?
Right. And, I'm assuming, my guess is that some of us here, or most of us on this webinar here, have implemented 365 in some way. But from day one, really deciding the license. We've talked a lot about the license, so keep that in mind. That's going to prevent a lot of vulnerabilities from showing up, ensuring that you're appropriate license. Are we going to be a hybrid or are we going to be a cloud native environment here? So that comes into play when we want to provision or add or sync accounts into the environment of 365 so we can start utilizing those services and features there, and then have a baseline of controls in mind, have an idea on how you want to um, implement access. Maybe it's like, hey, I still want my remote workforce to connect to the VPN instead of, just logging out to office.com and being able to check their email from any device anywhere in the United States, things of that nature. So have a plan in place for that, as well as you know, securing that access. What is our MFA provider? Are we going to go with Microsoft Authenticator? Are we going to go with Duo? Things of that nature. So we can kind of roll those policies up when we're setting up. So when those users do get provisioned over, those policies are in place and they get set up for that. So, and keeping up to date if we are a hybrid environment, the Entra Connect agent, if you follow any of the news, there's a big change coming in April this year. Um, Big improvement there. So making sure that that's staying up to date, and there's a way you can automatically update that through the tenant. So, and then when you're syncing accounts, so day two, you're going to start, syncing accounts over into the environment. Ensure that your domain admins on the network don't get synced over. That's just, they don't need that type of access. Those accounts don't need to exist in Entra. Those are administrative accounts on the network. So, think of bad guys that, if some unauthorized access, we can compromise a domain admin account and there could be some lateral movement there. So just not having those exist in the environment, because usually we just click like, hey, all user groups, we'll start syncing over. And then, making sure that the high privileged accounts within the Microsoft 365 space are cloud only accounts, meaning that they only exist in Microsoft 365. They don't exist on the on-prem. So that'll help from breaches either on the network or the cloud, and have that lateral movement technique accessible there for the bad guys. So putting roadblocks in there, see that quite a bit.
I think you piqued my interest a little bit, maybe with a little preview there. So what's the change coming in April, just in case anybody hasn't been following like myself?
So there's a update coming to the Entra Connect agent there, and they're requiring you to be up to the latest version before they push that out. So
Now, we've got some takeaways toward the end here, a lot of do's and don'ts. And if we have time, we'll go through those in more detail. But you talk a lot in those about strong MFA and weak MFA. Do you want to
Mm.
maybe elaborate a little bit what the difference between those two is?
Yeah, so I always tell folks, 2, 3 years, we've been just, really trying to get folks to implement multi-factor authentication. And usually that's going to be a push notification, a code to a cell phone through text, things of that nature. And now we're trying to move away from those types of MFA methods. So, sticking with the Microsoft Authenticator, if you're an admin to your environment, you understand the number matching. So a 2-digit code will pop up on your screen, and you go put it in your mobile device on the Authenticator app, right? And then there's this other method where we try to push administrative accounts to use, which is phishing resistant MFA there. So envision that as an MFA method other than a cell phone. So like a FIDO key, a biometric, smart card, certificate based type stuff there. So just ensuring that those more vulnerable MFA methods that are prone to, MFA fatigue or brute force through push notifications or SIM jacking and things of that nature, or even social engineering techniques where it's like, hey, this is Frank in IT. I'm going to send you a code to your cell phone. can you give that code back to me? Just because I'm going to verify who you are, so to say. So you see that technique happening a lot, where they, just recently in the news, this bad group is, sending a bunch of emails and people are having problems. So they call in as the IT team, as that issue to get into their accounts. So they're like, look over here, we're actually over here type technique. So those are some use cases to, hopefully encourage folks to use those stronger MFA methods.
So I should stop complaining every time I have to plug in a new 2-digit number into my phone and then enter my password and 5 other steps is what you're saying. All right. Don't think that if you set it up right, that it's automatically protecting you going forward. So Microsoft, and I've heard people complain about this. Obviously, it's there for good reason, but they do seem to change things pretty regularly. Do you notice, for again, somebody who's not as familiar with it, is there a particular cadence to that? And then how often do we see like those security measures being included in those sorts of patch updates?
Yeah, so for the Microsoft apps, by default, most folks are on what Microsoft calls the current channel. So those applications will get updated monthly there. And then for like new service and features, there's a couple different categories there, like private access or private review, public and general available. So for new features and services, starts with private, rolls out to a small group of folks for feedback and usability and, working out the bugs. And then they kind of open it up to public, to a wider group, kind of still collecting feedback. And then they eventually make it generally available. So that's a full release to all Microsoft customers there. And it's a really good, I think, process that they do that. How do we keep up to date with all this stuff? I always point people to the message center within their tenant, which is under the Microsoft 365 Admin Center. The message center will give you specific announcements specifically to your tenant if they pertain to you. And in the details, they'll obviously have the target date when you can expect this to be rolling out. Obviously, a description of the change and how it'll impact you, impact your organization, as well as how you can prepare for this change. So, really good stuff there within the tenant that you can stay up to date on those things.
Yeah. So it's like anything else. We just need to,
Yeah.
one thing in, one point in time, if we're good, it doesn't automatically mean we're set for life, obviously.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah.
All right. So last of our do's here. Do consider being proactive and having your environment reviewed by a third party. So obviously this goes hand in hand with some of the things we offer. We're not by any stretch the only company that offers this service of reviewing your environment. I think we do some really neat things that we'll talk about that in a moment or two that I think separate our review of your environment. But why is it, outside of, it's probably obvious to people, but Frank, why is it important to have that kind of independent review? Maybe not annually necessarily like we do IT audit or something, but at least fairly regularly.
Yeah. So what I tell folks, if you haven't, you had a review, and you haven't, started using SharePoint or other services or Intune for endpoint management, we're kind of just using the Microsoft apps and Teams, and I've made the remediations. I know where to kind of look for changes and stuff. you know, in that case, I say, every other year or every third year, have a third party come in and look. Obviously, if we increase our license or start, using SharePoint as our main storage centers and things like that, it's always good to kind of come in and have a third party look at that because, one, we're going to stay up to date on the frameworks and the controls and the changes and things of that nature, as well as, really take a look on how you want to use it and give you a good plan of action and on like, hey, there's a gap here, or hey, there's a better way of doing it this way, whatever that may be. So having an independent, look, like I don't, have any skin in the game, like here's the risk, here's the remediation, type stuff. So there's a perk of that.
Yeah, I think obviously this isn't, unless Frank, correct me if I'm wrong, this is not something that's currently mandated by regulation. That, maybe down the road it is, but
Mhm.
any proactivity you can show, and if you're in the financial services space, any type of examiner, hey, we're being proactive, we're doing these things, we're making sure our environment is up to snuff. That goes a long way, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Always encourage folks to share your progress, your proactiveness in your next exam or state exam. They're saying, hey, we had this reviewed by a third party. Here's our tracking. I've only had maybe 2 or 3 clients actually share with me that their examiners even brought up the words Microsoft
Hmm.
365, and it really was around the secured score portal or center there, if you will. And one examiner wanted, a printout of what you've done. The other one, the other situation was they wanted them to go through each one and address them,
Hmm.
so to say. So you're right. It's not being recommended by any federal regulator as of yet. So
Yeah, and I guess I imagine that's, won't make any predictions here today necessarily, but that does seem like that's something that might change down the road as this continues to proliferate and the risk increases.
Mhm.
Fair?
Fair. And, to that point there, Brett, is, 365 is an extension of your network, just like,
Mhm.
firewall, endpoints and stuff. This is processing, storing, transmitting sensitive information, and we got to treat it as an asset. So from, vendor management, risk management, all the way through decommission there. So it's, one of the things that we can do is have a third party review it on a regular cadence there, to help, control the risk of the environment
Sure.
or identify.
And I think that kind of goes hand in hand with our last don't, actually. Don't forget to include M365 as part of your incident response plan. This is one that you pointed out, I think, as part of one of your the
Yeah.
don'ts that you sent me. So I assume this is something that you run into occasionally, at least.
Yes, yes. And especially with folks that are really utilizing it, housing sensitive information and things like that. So really, alls we're really saying here is, create a playbook or a list of procedures there, around common incidents, compromised accounts, password spraying, phishing attempts and things like that, and get familiar with, the 365 security tools and features and how we, where's our logging? How can we analyze the logs? How are we going to control, a phishing attempt, or if someone got a hold of credentials and was accessing this account externally? Do we have any preventative controls there, challenges and things like that? So really, working through that playbook and then, testing it, right? If
Mhm.
it's just, with the team doing a tabletop exercise, or, training folks individually there, and then obviously having a regular security assessment to ensure that those things are in place as
Mhm.
well. So yeah, don't see a lot of plan around any compromise or incidents happening in the 365 space from a policy perspective. So yeah, it's always good to highlight and make sure we're talking about that during our annual testing or incident response discussions.
Probably something that's fairly easy to not think about or overlook,
Mhm.
but definitely, as you highlighted with the last do there, that this is something that stores, transmits, processes data, and we need to kind of treat it like we do anything that does that. So uh, I definitely think that's a critical part of this. So those are our do's and don'ts. We do have some more as a part of our takeaways that, if again we have a minute or two, I'll let Frank highlight some others that he might run into. And if you do want a copy of the deck, as I mentioned, we'll be happy to provide that. But Frank, I do want to, before we, as we start wrapping things up, we got about 15 minutes left here. This is kind of your baby, our M365 assessment. I know you're working on it even currently, trying to continue to make it more efficient and effective in terms of how we offer it. I will say I'd run into a lot of people when we start talking about RM365 assessment and the cost of it and kind of what's included with it. it does seem to be different in a lot of ways than kind of a scan only approach that we do see a lot of companies employing, where it's we're going to come in, we're going to run a scan just like we would in some other potential network security engagements. We'll hand you a report, you write us a check, and we're good to go. But how would you, first of all, how would you say this differs from kind of that scan only approach? And then maybe you could walk us through a little bit of what it looks like on a, as you're executing this sort of engagement for a customer.
Yeah, absolutely. So you got a list of the areas, kind of top level,
Mhm.
10,000 foot view, what we're diving into there. And ours is more manual based, rightfully so. Scans, tools that can scan cloud infrastructures are great. They're a great place to start. But the results of those can be inaccurate, and some controls might not even get verified, so to say. So there is a manual process, in my opinion, to ensuring that, hey, we're identifying all the capabilities that you have, and the risks and the threats that this environment is pertains to there. So really, we're going to start off kind of what we're doing here right now, screen sharing, walking through controls, and talking about use cases, and hey, what's your plan around this conditional access, things of that nature. And really, through our assessment, if you've done business with us before, and you probably already know this, this isn't a gotcha type thing. It's like, hey, you need to do this. We're going to talk about it, want your feedback. You might be, having other solutions or other processes in place that are providing this protection for you. So we really want to walk through and identify all the capabilities and the ways we can mitigate the risk and keep the bad guys out. So conditional access is a big part of that. Data management's a big part of that. Securing user accounts is a big part of that. Really talking about all the big things in cybersecurity as it pertains to the environment there. So a scan's not going to be able to do that for you, but like a scan, it's a good tool. It can be helpful there, but it's not the say all be all type thing.
I think one thing that's really a differentiator for the assessment that, again, you've kind of worked to build out and continue to build out is it's kind of a three-pronged approach, right? There's an assessment where I don't want to use the word audit because it's not mandated, but we're going to
Mhm.
assess the environment to see where you're at. We're going to do consulting, right? Where it's kind of talking to you and kind of helping you understand what you might want to do to remediate, what might you need to do to fix things. And then I even think there's a pretty big educational component of it as well, just kind of
Mhm.
helping people understand capabilities, what they can be doing, what they should be doing, those sorts of things. So do you want to talk about maybe how that three-pronged approach is something that we take as part of this?
Yeah, absolutely. And the consulting and the knowledge is really what we focus on. Yeah, we know we need to have MFA. We know we need to do these things, and sometimes it's like, hey, how do we, for example, I know this is one of the dues, so I'm going to get ahead of myself, is MFA registration. We talked about this where, a lot of folks set up a conditional access policy that bypasses MFA for on-prem locations or trusted locations. And over time, maybe that user only signs in from that trusted location, right? And we don't have another conditional access policy that blocks external sign-ins outside of these trusted locations. So therefore, there's a gap, right? So a scan's not going to really tell you that, and looking at really talking through that with the client and understanding, okay, now a bad guy could potentially phish this user, get their username and password, log in externally through office.com or something like that. And if we're disabling OWA, perfect, good. That's a mitigating control to this use case. Maybe we're not. Therefore, the bad actor can sign in the account and set up MFA on their device. So it's it's a lot of that, kind of getting granular and into kind of how the bad guys are attacking these cloud accounts, and ensuring that we're staying one step ahead. And we do that by this service and having those conversations during our time with them. So
Yeah, and I think one thing I've come across when I'm talking to clients, and you've sat in on some of those calls with me, that they do talk about is, I kind of want to learn, right? I want to,
Mhm.
not shadow you in every step of the way, but they do seem to, in some cases express interest in, like, this is something that I need to know about more than what I currently do. And I know you've done a really good job, kind of, again, with that education component of helping them understand it, not just from a consulting perspective even, but from a almost teaching and mentoring perspective.
Yeah. There's a lot of cool things within the tenant that we can get an idea. For example, conditional access is the heartbeat of your environment. This is, I always compare conditional access to a firewall. Instead of filtering network traffic, it is creating policies or rules, if you will, to other signals such as devices, accounts, resources, and things like that. So we can put in rules, policies that can challenge those or require specific requirements to access that. And really talking through, yeah, we can talk about all the conditional access policies, but hey, are they actually working, right? So there's a what if button within
Mm-hmm.
the, I think it's a very powerful tool where you can kind of say, hey, this user is trying to access this resource from this location, from this device. Will my conditional access policy apply or not? And if it doesn't apply, you get a reason why it doesn't. Maybe they're excluded from that group, or maybe, they don't have access to that, or whatever it may be. So really kind of sharing all the administrative tricks, all the information security items for the ISO, and how we can leverage the things in the environment to be able to detect and respond and remediate, is always the goal there quickly.
So last question on this screen, before we move on and do some of the other additional do's and don'ts that I know you maybe want to hit on a couple of them. You've obviously done some work with some scanning type systems. We use them to create efficiencies, and we're working to, to make sure that we're, making it easier on the customer, and while still doing all the great manual stuff we're talking about. I think you've mentioned in the past that those scans sometimes can throw up false positive, for lack of a better phrase, I guess, false positives, or maybe they don't catch something that you might catch in a manual process. And I just want to turn it over to you to see if that's, again,
Yeah, that's
accurate for
definitely
sure.
been my experience with scanning tools where, for example, every organization like ours that has a service like this is probably basing their work paper off of the CIS benchmarks for 365, right? And a lot of these tools use that same framework to scan the 365 environment as well. Well, in my experience, majority of, I don't have a percentage, but I'll say a majority of the controls, they do get scanned, but they don't get validated because you got to go either manually in there and verify them, is kind of the output that I get. So the good output, what I'm expecting to see is, a pass or fail. Well, that's a handful of the controls, right? So, yes, those are, sometimes can be, actually this is a pass, or actually this isn't fully there yet, but
Mhm.
it should have been a fail type thing. So definitely have to have that manual process, and providing and being able to explain that.
Yeah.
We're not going to be able to, just say, hey, here's a scan and here's all, you know, I don't have that much faith in a scan. It's a great tool, again, to in my arsenal to use to hopefully, verify what I see, if anything. Um, so, but yeah,
Mhm.
if there's a scanner out there that folks know that does a great job, use it and let me know.
Right. All right. So we've got two slides here, a takeaways do and a takeaways don't. Some of them we've already touched on. We are coming up on about 5 minutes left. So, Frank, I'm going to give you pick one on the do's and one on the don'ts, and then we're going to see if we have any questions here. So anything that stands out on this that we haven't discussed, you want to hit on?
Yeah, so create break glass accounts. Don't lock yourself out of your tenant. This I should have mentioned this in this the setup slide, but have that break glass account. The biggest use case is, for smaller institutions, I say that don't have a whole lot of global admins already. It's probably more important to have one of these. So if you create a conditional access policy and lock everybody out of the 365 space, you have an account to get back in there and turn that policy off and reconfigure it.
I guess as you probably run into some horror stories over that one.
It's happened, unfortunately.
All right. So again, happy to share this slide that's got some additional ones on here. How about a don't? Pick a don't off here, and then we'll see if we've got some
Oh,
questions we can
I
answer.
kind of did a double there, didn't I? I want to say this, and I'll say it till I'm blue in the face. Don't bypass MFA from trusted locations there. At least put in a 7-day sign-in frequency. Just ensuring, you guys, a lot of us talk about zero trust. We've all heard it. One of the main pillars there is trust nothing, verify everything, and bypassing the network there is a violation to that principle. So 7-day frequency there and ensure that who has the high privilege. Don't over privilege
Yeah.
folks um, within the environment as
Yeah,
well.
I was gonna cheat a little bit and ask you to cover maybe that overprivileged accounts, and then I think the unverified third party applications. Maybe if you can give us a 30
Yeah, and I
second.
put that one in there because a lot of the access, if it's an add-in to the Microsoft web applications or the third-party apps within the Office store or within Teams itself, really just kind of cutting the head off the snake there and ensure that users can't just go out and use those. Instead, they send a request to an admin saying, "Hey, I need to use Dropbox for XYZ," and then there's an approval process there just to ensure, um, again, reducing shadow IT and knowing kind of the I don't want to say vulnerable, but some of the more high risk third party applications in your environment.
And then the overprivileged accounts. Anything on that one that scares you in particular?
Yeah, so a lot of folks, you see this in larger institutions where, maybe someone in compliance or in risk needed access to the compliance admin center, aka Purview now, um, to validate something for an audit. Well, they gave them global admin, and we come in and do an assessment, and they're like, yeah, they don't need it anymore. So really talking about how we can control and provide um, privileged access securely and maybe not for 365 days out of the year for some folks that don't need it. So really shrinking that attack surface for those high privileged accounts is always something that we should be reviewing and thinking about.
That's a great one. All right, Frank, you're awesome. I'm going to ask you to stick around. I'm going to stop sharing for a minute. I have to do that. I apologize in order to see if we've got any questions here. And then I'm going to pull that back up and we'll put our contact information on here. But we got a question about, you mentioned licensing several times. How important do you feel it is to be licensed with P1? How much additional risk do you have by not having that?
So that's a really good question, Tony. I'm going to assume that's going to be Entra Plan 1, not Exchange Online Plan 1, or maybe it is. But with the Entra, what I tell folks here is, and again, I'm going to throw this out there, m365maps.com. It's a website that lists out all the Microsoft license and the features on those licenses. It's created by a Microsoft employee named Aaron Denage. He updates it twice a year. It's a great resource for license questions. But if it's Entra Plan 1, this is going to be specifically to like your Entra environment. So your conditional access, your application controls, creating users, giving permissions and stuff. This isn't going to give you, SharePoint, OneDrive, email and things like that. So what I tell folks with the Entra Plan 1 is assign it to your GA accounts, your global admin accounts. If you need to assign any license to those. But risk to assume that they're not having a P1 license. Now, if we just have like business basic or we just giving someone an exchange online, then the risk there is conditional access will cannot be utilized. And if we have, say, licenses in our environment that do provide conditional access, but we have folks that are not licensed for it. Potentially, those conditional access policies will not apply to them. So there's some risk there of, maybe MFA or blocking access to specific applications or from external resources there for those accounts accessing whatever they're licensed for. So really, really looking at ensuring that P1, Entra P1 is included for all your users is a good idea.
We did get one question about whether or not SBS does setup of M365. That's not something we're currently offering. I don't believe we don't do any of the MSP stuff, but certainly the review of the setup we'd be more than happy to come in and take a look at for you. But we are at the hour mark. I can't thank Frank. Can't thank you enough for jumping on here with me. I think your expertise was very well received. I loved all the stuff in the chat. Sorry, I don't always get to see all that, but if there were some questions in there that we didn't get to, Frank or I will make sure we follow up. Please do take that survey. We would really appreciate your feedback there. And if you have any interest in getting the deck or a recording or some information about the assessment, we'd be happy to have that conversation as well. But hope everybody has a great rest of their day. Thank you again for your time, and hope we'll see you on the next one here. So thanks again, and have a great day.
That was fun.
All right. Thanks, Frank. I'll catch up with you in a minute.
Oh, okay. I was like, do I stay or should I go? See you, man. Bye.